One of the things that we've discovered very, very recently is that flow states have triggers. These are preconditions that lead to more flow. So if you're interested in kind of hacking your consciousness with this stuff, these 20 triggers are your toolkit. And we have individual triggers. There are 10 or 11 of these that will drive an individual into flow. And then we have group triggers. This is the product of Keith Sawyer's research at the University of North Carolina. And there are 10 group triggers. And group triggers will drive a team into flow, produce a collective shared flow state known as group flow, right? You've taken part in a great brainstorming session where the ideas are flying off the wall. That's group flow in action. If you've seen a fourth quarter comeback in football or basketball, that's group flow in action. We can talk a little bit more about these triggers in a second, but the one thing I want to tell you, just so you know, is flow follows focus. Only shows up when all our attention is in the right here, right now. That's what these triggers do. They drive our attention into the present moment. More specifically, not all of them, but most of them tend to drive norepinephrine and dopamine, which are our main focusing chemicals. That's really what's going on under the hood. Now, I don't want to leave you hanging. I want to give you some practical advice. So I said we just did a giant study on creativity and flow. It was interesting. About 2,100 people took part. And what we were looking at is, among other things, what triggers are most associated with heightened creativity. First, we wanted to look at the big numbers that creativity with this 400 to 700% spike. We were like, well, what the hell is that? What do we mean by creativity? So we broke creativity down. We looked at the process portions of creativity. And so we found that idea generation, for example, goes up 40%. Problem solving goes up 40%. And so you start to see where those big numbers come from because these things start to stack on one another. We also found 3 triggers are most associated with creativity across the board in knowledge workers. Right? So what everybody in this room does for a living. The first is obvious, complete concentration. Flow follows focus. Only shows up when we're in the right here, right now. But what that means, by the way, is the research shows us that you need 90 to 120 minutes of uninterrupted concentration to really maximize flow. So that means you need 90 to 120 minutes where your office door can be shut, where your phone is off, where your email is off, where Facebook is off, where Twitter is off. It means if you're running a team, right, and you're telling your team members that they have to email you back in a half an hour, you're literally locking that team out of the very state of consciousness they need to maximize performance. For example, it's why when I go into organizations, I always tend to say, if you can't hang a sign on your door that says, beep off, I'm flowing, you're sunk, right? Next thing we see with creativity is it requires the challenge skills balance, often called the golden rule of flow, most important of flow's triggers. The idea is that we pay the most attention to the right here, right now task at hand when the challenge of the task at hand slightly exceeds our skill set. So you want to stretch, but not snap. Emotionally, this means flow sits not on, but near the midpoint between boredom, not enough stimulation, I could give a shit, and anxiety. Whoa, way too much stimulation, right? In between is this sweet spot. Finally, immediate feedback. This should come as no surprise here at Google, but this is one of the reasons, by the way, we saw so much flow in action sports. In action sports, you have immediate feedback. You're a skier, you don't set that edge at the top of the run, you're on a face-first death slide to the bottom. It's really obvious. Same thing happens in software, of course. Agile software, the entire agile movement, right, was about tightening up feedback loops, and one of the reasons is it maximizes creative flow, right? And so obviously, in business, for example, if you've got quarterly reports or annual reports and that's the only feedback you're getting, it's a disaster for this stuff. The last thing I want to tell you about the triggers is they're remarkably easy to train. And if you would have come to me 5 years ago, in fact, the last time I spoke here, 2 times ago, and said, what do you believe about flow? What would you bet your house on? I would have bet my house that this stuff is massively hard to train. Absolutely. Turns out we were deadly wrong about that. The example is 2 or 3 years ago, thanks to Adam Leonard, we teamed up with you guys and ran a 6-week joint learning exercise, right? And over a course of 6 weeks, we took about 70 Googlers from all over the company, so facilities and sales and marketing and coding and engineering and take your pick. And we trained people up about an hour's worth of homework a day in 4 high-performance basics. I mean, basics like sleep hygiene, right? Get enough sleep at night and then put yourself on a sleep monitor to take care of it. And the use of really what amounted to 4 flow triggers. And on the back end of that, we tested flow pre and post. We found a 35 to 80% increase in flow. Now, it's a little high, but because people self-selected to be in that class, right? They were already interested in the topic, so those numbers are probably a little skewed. But I will tell you, we have a digitally delivered course called Flow Fundamentals. And it's the same thing, same similar structure. We were a little more intensive with what we did here. But again, we measure pre and post. And on average, and thousands of people have taken this course by now, we're seeing a 70% increase in each of Flow's metrics. And this doesn't mean our Kung Fu is exceptionally badass, which it is. What it really means is that this stuff is really easy. We're all biologically hardwired for it. Back in the 1990s, at the same time Andy Newberg was doing his really brave work, another guy named Richard Davidson started recording the brainwaves of monks, Tibetan Buddhists, who had about 30 years of meditation time, and he discovered some really cool things, that their brainwaves essentially sit on the edge of flow at all times, and that there's a huge amount of gamma, which you want for extra creativity in their brainwaves. But who the hell has 30 years? Let alone 30 hours, right? So what did we do? Well, we recorded those brainwaves, and now using neurofeedback and EEG, we are training people to move in the same direction in 3 weeks, 3 months, very compressed time frames. In fact, if you want more flow in your life, the same technology is available to you. Go to theflowgenomeproject.com. There's a free flow profile there. Under the Learn tab. It's a diagnostics, it's traitology. It says if you're this kind of person, you're likely to find flow in these directions. It's become one of the largest studies in optimal performance ever run. Killed another long-standing darling. We thought when we started this work, flow absolutely must show up the most in action adventure sport athletes and in sort of performing arts. People in bands, people on stage, that kind of stuff. Turns out, no. The vast majority of our study subjects, I think like 80,000 people have taken the study at this point, are knowledge workers. They do what everybody in this room does for a living. The most flow tends to show up in knowledge work.
If what you've heard on Flow Research Collective Radio has been helpful, please consider doing us a solid and leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening to this. Reviews help us connect to a wider audience so we can get these peak performance principles out to more people.